New Alliance Talk. How can Africa scale urban innovation and unlock capital for resilient, sustainable cities? Please welcome your host for this session, Elizabeth Mansfeld from International Journalists Programs.
Good afternoon, guests. It's a true honor to welcome you to this session at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. And please take a seat and let me start with a personal note. I come here as someone who has worked with partners across Africa, with the African Centers for Cities, LSE Cities, and the International Journalists Program, where partnerships and its action give voice to those shaping sustainable futures. And to build new partnerships, whether in policy or finance, it takes more than strategies and tools. It takes trust, and it takes courage, and it starts with people. And I believe big systems are moved by small interactions. And we are here, each of us here can be part of that shift. So it's been a privilege to co-create the session with institutions deeply committed to this topic, the African Union Commission, UN Habitat, UNDP, GIZ, and the African Center for Cities. Together, we've designed today's discussion around one simple but powerful question. What will it take to connect up capital with city-led innovation and scale urban resilience in Africa? If we look at some numbers, Africa's urban population will double by 2050. That means over 35 million people per year will need additional homes, transport, water, and jobs. And today, 92% Africa's fastest growing cities are already classified as highly climate vulnerable. Dependent on statistics, the continent requires $170 billion in infrastructure investments. And capital is still missing. So what are the bottlenecks? Cities expected to build the future, but they lack fiscal power. Across Africa, cities, subnational governments collect just 5% of public revenue, only a third of the global average. For investors, costs remain stubbornly high, and the real bottleneck is not capital available globally, but the lack of investment-ready projects. Often investments flow into large-scale projects because investors seek size, stability, and scale, and small-scale urban innovation, like housing, climate adaptation is often fragmented, localized, and community-driven. So informal innovation remains invisible. And from climate-smart housing to decentralized solar, many Africa's most resilient solutions don't qualify for investments. And I have seen that in my time in Zimbabwe, that people are most innovative in becoming to access energy and to build their own basic infrastructures. So it's key to bridge large-scale infrastructure with small-scale urban innovation to achieve a sustainable and inclusive growth. So today we explore how can we move from this fragmentation to scale, and how do we match policy with financial reality. We've brought together speakers who are actively reshaping this landscape, and they will share what's working with collective action at local level, national, and Pan-African level, from new planet finance to instrumental regional matchmaking platforms, where the next breakthroughs need to happen. So let me leave you with that sentence. Capital flows when resilience creates security, and resilience attracts capital when systems are in place to make it visible, viable, and scalable. It's not either or, it's an interplay. And it's time to make that interplay work. So let me now welcome and open the conversation with Gabriela Hoven, Managing Director from the GIZ. Warm welcome to Gabriela Hoven.
Hello, so Excellencies, honorable delegates to the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, distinguished guests, friends of this very specific ecosystem. I'm going to skip a little bit my introductory remarks as Elisabeth has already provided us with a broad range of numbers that are relevant to this panel. Let me first say I would like to congratulate the EU Commission as well as UN Habitat for organizing this event with our contribution, because it's an absolutely utmost, it's really a topic that deserves more attention. And we have heard this morning from the first mayor of Hamburg, Mr. Tschentscher, that of course urbanization and what lies ahead of us offers big opportunities, because urban areas normally are the centers of innovation, are the centers of economic growth, but at the same time they are going to face more risks in the near future due to the climate crisis and the bigger necessities to adapt to a new ecological environment. I would perhaps like to underline that when we want to scale urban resilience across Africa, we have to address three critical areas. Certainly, it's important that we align city-led action with continental and regional policy frameworks. So strong urban governance depends on a strong regional ownership, and this should be embedded and rooted into the specific ecosystems. We have seen in the past it's not that easy to unlock climates for climate-smart infrastructure, because normally cities are very different from each other, so they need really tailor-made finance, and also they need to build up capacities that are not available yet in order to do the right planning, in order to identify the right projects, and then, of course, to make them bankable. And this is sometimes a very stony pathway, and there's very much need and required. And thirdly, I think has been said often, almost in many panels that I'm participating in on this subject, we speak about the localization of implementation. We all know that the SDGs have to be localized. There's really where actually action receives impact. So resilience starts at the community level through inclusive and gender-responsive action and participatory planning processes. Only then we can really capture local needs and local knowledge in order to build up resilience teams that are tailor-made for the respective communities. In our implementation efforts that we do on behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, we very much align ourselves with the African Union's Agenda 2063, and we do this through the so-called Africa Urban Resilience Program and the Resilience Initiative for Africa. This one is being funded by the BMZ. Let me perhaps give you one example what is actually feasible, because later on the panel is going to give us more insights. Are we going to mobilize the support, the financing, the implementation, acceleration that we need in order to deal with urban resilience? But over the last couple of years, we have experienced together with the C40 City Finance Facility and the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, how much can be done in order to scale up funding. And we do this through the civic platform and the so-called Cities Finance Facility, CFF. We have actually reached over 2 million people in in providing support to increase urban resilience. And the projects that we have identified and have been promoted in order so that they get a broader range of funding are going to reduce more than 7.5 million tons of CO2 over the next 30 years. This may sound little, it isn't. It's as much as roughly the equivalent of annual emissions of a city the size of Barcelona or Brussels. But even more important is actually that civic supported city to mobilize over 1 billion in climate finance over the next forthcoming years by 2030. And it's been done by identifying perhaps the first project ideas, giving a hand to municipalities to make them bankable. And then, of course, it's important to have a strong partnership in place with international finance institutions. And one of our prime partners in this respect for GIZ is also the European Investment Bank. In a nutshell, I think we want to encourage you to pay more attention to urban resilience, to actually look into what is feasible, look into the success stories, and look into also perhaps the bottlenecks, and we are going to learn more about this in a minute. And then, of course, we hope that by this conference and through this panel also, we continue to build up smart and robust partnerships that bring together the African Union Commission, UN Habitat, development banks, and of course, local leaders, municipalities, and they should actually carry the torch. But I think it's really, really important that we continue to invest more political intention and concrete endeavors in international cooperation to capitalize on the innovation, the spirit, the energy that is embedded at the local level. And this is so key important in order to serve people and the planet. I wish you very delightful deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriela, for this powerful appeal that we need partnerships, and GIZ plays a really important role, especially as well on the urban initiatives on RIA and Aqinile. And let me now briefly introduce our session format. We have today 5 speakers, and we move through policy, finance, and local innovation. And each speaker will offer a 4-minute impulse before the short closing round. I think time flies. So now let me welcoming our guests. My first guest is former Cabinet Minister of Kingdom Eswatini, Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment of the African Union Commission, Excellency Mr. Moses Vilakati. Welcome on stage. You please move to the next. My second guest is Manager for Infrastructure and Urban Development at the African Development Bank, Stefan Atchia. Please welcome. Third is Co-Head of Emerging Markets Alternative Credit at the Impact Fund 91, Martijn Proos. Welcome on stage. Executive Director of UN Habitat, Anacláudia Rossbach. Welcome. And warmly welcome Global Knowledge Lead at Slum Dwellers International, Annie Boykes. Thank you for having you. Let me start with the continental perspective, and keeping in mind that we have Africa, that we have 45 countries, and Africa is diverse. And how can the African Union, in its role, help to align national urban policies and funding frameworks to unlock capital for city-led innovation? And my second small question, what specific regional mechanism can support that fiscal local capacity where cities are lacking?
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies and all the delegates present in here. This is a mouthful, but let me start off by saying sustainability is a principle which is enshrined in the Africa's Development Blueprint and the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. The African Union Commission, as the gateway to Africa, is entrusted with building resilience to various phenomena, including climate change and disaster risks, as well as promoting sustainable management of natural resources through its Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment. Climate change, climate variability, and associated extreme weather events, which, according to our records, are on the increase in frequency and intensity in Africa, are negatively impacting lives, infrastructure, and livelihoods in urban areas, especially disasters which pose a critical threat to Africa's socio-economic development. Rapid urbanization is exposing more people, infrastructure, and systems to climate and disaster risks across the continent. This challenge demands urgent and coordinated solutions. Our response has been robust. There has been the development of a comprehensive continental framework known as the Africa Urban Resilience Program. This is an approach to building resilience in cities by addressing multiple risks in an integrated and sustainable way. Allow me to express our heartfelt gratitude of the African Union Commission to the federal government of Germany through BMZ for the rollout of the Resilience Initiative Africa, which significantly supports the implementation of the Africa Urban Resilience Program. Examining the current demographic and socio-economic changes, it is evident that a significant challenge facing Africa's cities is how to finance urban development opportunities. Similarly, initiatives like the GIZ-led Resilience Initiative Africa and Aqinile partnership comprising AUC, UNDP, UN Habitat, and UNEP can bridge the trust, capacity, and visibility gaps that keep cities out of investment pipelines. Ensuring a sustainable financing and investment for African cities is therefore critically important, and I believe this conference will help find some solutions. For example, we are currently collaborating with C40 cities to support the joint call from 17 African mayors and governors for urgent and collaborative actions. Their goal is to secure the financing necessary for cities to promote sustainable urban development and enhance their resilience to the growing climate emergency. Through the Africa Urban Resilience Program, we are requesting national governments, regional economic communities, city leaderships, as well as other agencies to factor climate resilience considerations systematically into their development planning and interventions to promote a similar approach with multilateral entities. We are working very closely with city authorities and municipality leaders to co-produce and design projects that are tailor-made to respond to resilient challenges. Over the last 6 months, for example, 12 cities in Africa have prepared what we term pilot projects with the support of the AU and GIZ, and these will be ready for investment to scale up the impacts by the end of the year. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, our approach and resolve to overcome critical barriers to investments in urban development align with key recommendations from recent reports. Some of these include the improving municipal revenue collection and governance. This creates an enabling environment for investments in cities. 2, leveraging on domestic and international financial markets, fiscal decentralization through support to national and local tax reforms. 3, increasing the size and the effectiveness of fiscal transfers to cities. for improving city creditworthiness by achieving an investment-grade credit rating, as well as sound financial management. I therefore consider this Hamburg Sustainability Conference as a vital platform to open up the dialogue, to listen and learn, to amplify the urban resilience and wider development agenda in Africa, and to harness partnership, to harness dividends, as well as resources which are needed to scale up our efforts. I invite all development partners present, banks, governments, private sector, and research institutions to join us in this endeavor to co-create solutions and invest in the future of Africa's cities. We want to create climate resilience development and sustainable management of our natural resources. I wish to emphasize that the session we are hosting at this conference goes just beyond the mere dialogue. It is a call to action so that we can support our cities. With your partnership and support, we can ensure that African cities are not only engines of growth and development, but also the bastions of resilience, inclusion, and sustainability.
Thank you, Ambassador, and for this important framing of African Union's impetus on the different programs and actions with partners, as well as German partners. And let's now zoom in what actions and what programs we see on the financing mechanism. And I would love to first look at the public perspective, public finance of the African Development Bank. And Mr. Atchia, the African Development Bank plays a central role in shaping Africa's urban infrastructure financing ecosystem, and we talked much before different approaches. And why many cities struggle to access financing because projects either are too small, too risky, or too early stage. From your perspective, how can local governments be more effectively empowered to access infrastructure and climate finance? And what are the most pressing reforms, fiscal, institutional, or regulatory, must be implemented?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And again, thank you very much for the kind invitation to the beautiful city of Hamburg. It's a delight to be here. Just a few numbers to get started. We just published, led with the help of the OECD, Philip is here, the new Africa Urban Dynamics 2025. Here are some numbers. Today in Africa, you have about 700 million people living in cities. By 2050, we'll be about 1.4 billion. We'll be just behind, actually behind Asia with about 3.4. By 2050, 2 out of every 3 Africans will be living in a city. So that's the expansion of our agglomerations. We'll have about 159 cities, which will be more than 1 million people. 17 of them will be mega cities with more than 10 million people, like Kinshasa today. A lot of them will be growing through fusion, which is a lot of cities connecting to each other, making large agglomeration. 61% of African cities will be built over the next 3 decades. So the weight on us looking forward the next 30 years ahead of us is quite exciting. At the same time, it gives us a real cold sweat to know how we're going to finance this. Looking at the numbers here, what is the current general direct government investment per capita in cities, let's say around the world, for benchmarking? The world average is around $800 per capita investment in our cities. In Europe, I'm sure it's the same thing here in Hamburg, we're about $1,700 per capita. In America, it's around 500. In Asia, it's 700. In Africa, it's just over 100. So you have this massive investment that needs to be done. It's estimated between 130 to 170 billion per year. I mean, everybody has their own estimate here. The question is, how do we do those kind of investment with currently so low investment per capita? At the FDB, like MDB, we have to work together. We have to collaborate. We are in a very good group called MDB Urban Group, and we are looking at the foundation from policy, from program, plans, and then projects. Not all projects. I hear often the private sector needs to come in, yes, But the private sector only comes in if there's proper policy and framework. Then what is our role? We can do two things. One, we can do project finance, or we can do things like intermediary. We are better as a multilateral bank often to do what we call wholesale finance versus detailed finance. We are better financing banks that will actually do the work in the country. For example, in Morocco, we work with the Fonds d'équipement communal, which is a municipal bank for the Moroccan cities. But we can actually provide financial financing directly to cities. The key question that we find on working on the 54 countries of which we cover is a question of preparing projects. A project is about 1 to 2% of the cost of the project. So if a project is 100 million, you need about 1 to 2 million just to prepare the project. And that amount of money is often not there from the government finances or national treasury. So we need to find them. This is when the MDBs and bilaterals come very handy to be able to prepare projects, get the documentation
So
ready.
what pressing reforms and fiscal institutional regulatory must be implemented?
Absolutely. So this is where the financing part for the cities are involved. The colleague from Norway who just spoke a few minutes ago was talking about taxation. We are working right now more and more with people who are a bit behind the scene, which is basically the revenue authorities and the Ministry of Finance to get the taxation system on. I mean, OECD countries, you've already done that many, many years ago, which is your property tax, commercial tax for your cities, and from that, increase the amount of revenues on your balance sheets. And then once you have a balance sheet which is actually quite sustained, then you can actually borrow, especially on the local markets. Cities in Africa are not going to borrow hard currency, not tomorrow, not many of them. The bulk will be borrowing on local currency with the local market. That's why I was saying for us to go for intermediaries, it actually makes more sense for us to develop that kind of business using local banks, local national development banks, and be able to borrow on local currency. So that is our, if you want, the key elements that we're looking at is project preparation, getting the local taxation systems on municipal tax working, increasing and sanitizing the balance sheet. My colleague just mentioned about grants, revenue, local transfer, stabilize them. Not everywhere it's stable. Sometimes it goes up and off, and then increase significantly own revenue. And we provide this currently. We have very good example where by those kind of investment, we see the local revenue go up significantly very quickly.
But that's a really important point. How do we now activate the trillions of private capital sitting on the sideline? And that's one important question to Martijn, who is here for the private sector. And behind your work, you worked across dozens of countries in mobilizing capital for public good infrastructure. So many still say, and we just heard it, urban projects are unbankable. So from your perspective, what financing structures and de-risking strategies have you found effective on working in that sector?
Okay, I will try to prove the opposite, that there are bankable structures out there, and give you some examples. So indeed, I work for 91, and we manage one of the oldest blended finance funds to date, the Emerging Africa and Asia Infrastructure Fund, which is part of the Private Infrastructure Development Group. I think, staggering numbers that we heard, the amount of investment that is needed, and I looked up one as well, 1.5 trillion is needed annually for cities in emerging markets to meet the targets of the SDGs, as well as climate resilience. 90% of all new emissions will be made in emerging markets, mainly by cities. So if we want to win the battle for net zero, it is largely in emerging markets. There's not enough money available currently in these markets to meet these challenges. Where does that money sit? Sits partly locally, stuck within pension funds and banks that need to be mobilized, but it also sits largely in the Northern Hemisphere. And that money needs to move south to meet these challenges. Platforms like one of the funds that we are managing, which is blended finance, backed by some four European governments, is A2 rated, but then also attracts private sector capital to de-risk the structure and to give institutional investors access to that asset class in, for say, Africa or other emerging markets in order for them to be able to invest. Currently, very few of these products exist. But then the question is, okay, if you create these products, where would they invest? And I want to give you like 2 examples of our experience. We have got a $1.6 billion portfolio, all invested in privately managed and owned infrastructure projects in Africa. Last year, we financed the BRT in Dakar, which is a rapid bus transport system where the public sector and the private sector perfectly work together. So Dakar, heavily congested, a bus system that was very fragmented. And in partnership, the government of Senegal worked together with the World Bank and the EU to create a framework to build a corridor on the main roads in Dakar, to build the essential infrastructure and a separate bus lane. And they financed that with concessional capital. And that was needed because there's no business case for it. However, then you need to drive buses on it. And that is perfectly possible to let that do by a private sector operator. So that's the part that we financed. And we didn't do diesel buses, but we did EV buses. We used a bit of blended finance to cover the additional cost over the price over diesel buses to make it affordable. But here you have an example where there was a good framework where the public sector and the private sector worked together, where legal and regulatory frameworks made it possible for the private sector to invest in a safe and good environment. So perfect example, in my opinion, to make this possible. Another one, a couple of years ago, we financed one of the few private bulk water treatment plants, in this case in Rwanda. Supplies up to 33% of the potable water in the city of Kigali. Again, if you look at the whole project, it required a water treatment plant and it required ancillary infrastructure to connect to the network in Kigali, including reservoirs. The whole project was hard to make it financed completely on a private basis. The government financed with concessional funding the pipelines and the reservoirs, but the water treatment plant could be done on a PPP basis and is completely bankable. So again, the government only needs to finance a portion of it, can use that budget for other things like health and education, and let the private sector finance a piece that is completely bankable.
Thank you, Martijn. And it's really powerful to see that there are projects which are bankable,
Absolutely.
but we need, and we heard it today many times, we need to scale these. And I want to look at now the local level and turn what is the city in the inclusion lens, because we shouldn't forget not the voices on the ground. So let me invite you, Anacláudia, from your perspective. How can cities, from UN Habitat, from your perspective, can cities, especially the secondary ones, with limited fiscal space, be empowered to become better investment partners while ensuring urban development remains inclusive?
Yeah, no, sure, Elizabeth. And I'm glad that my predecessor speaker was just sharing some experiences of projects that work, because I believe it's a good starting point. For us to have this conversation, right? And I had the privilege, Excellency, of my first international trip after I got this position in August last year was to the African Urban Forum, organized under the auspices of the African Union. We worked together, we met the African Development Bank there, SDI and GIZ, so the whole community was there. And I was very impressed to see, you know, how many good experiences we already have, despite all the challenges, how many good experiences we do have, right? Led by all of your organizations, but looking at UN Habitat, how UN Habitat has been supporting projects in cities secondary cities, even on waste management, on access to water, on strengthening, the capacity of the governments at the city level, on slum upgrading. So we have a portfolio of very successful projects that we implement. Many of those we implemented in partnership because this is the way to go, right? And that have been working and generated impact, to a certain number of people and communities and so on. But right now we have to go to another level, right? And we just approved our new strategic plan. We are going towards a new direction. So I believe what we have to do now, and as a coalition of organizations, all of us that are here today, is looking at how can we learn from these projects, not only to scale up and replicate, but to promote systemic change. Mm-hmm. So that we are sure that the next project, for example, the next BRT project that you design, you work on, are connecting people from A to B, which is where they're going to live and where they're going to work, where they're going to access all the services that, as rightly pointed out by Gabrielle, they are the foundation of the localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because at the end of the day, if we don't plan the territory, right, if we don't connect the services in the territory, the school, the clinic, the employment center, the city center, and so on. If we don't connect in the territory, it doesn't work. And this is through city planning, and this is through holistic planning. So going from projects to systemic change, looking at urban planning, at the big picture, and empowering also secondary cities through the national level, right? So making sure that the national framework, the urban legislation, the regulations, and the financial regulations that are out there, at the end of the day, they land in cities, right, to the right people. And finally, to conclude, since SDI will come after me, looking at participation and governance, which is a key mean of implementation of our new plan. So we really have to work on a social contract to make sure that the vision of cities, how cities are growing horizontally, vertical, makes sense for everybody. It's inclusive and sustainable.
Thank you, Anacláudia. And you emphasized a really important point, that it's about aggregating the fragmentation and the different approaches which we have in our silos, in our sectors, in finance, international and national policy, and on local level, aggregating those together and not forgetting the really local voices. And there I invite Annie Boykes from Slum Dweller.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellencies, fellow delegates and friends, especially our friends, Anacláudia Rossbach, who has been a friend to SDI and to slum dwellers, communities and federations throughout her career and all over the world. So, what are slum dwellers doing to help cities and communities to deliver on some of these? Madam Executive Director said in a previous session, it's only planned cities who are profitable cities and can be bankable cities. So right now, as we are here, from the bustling streets of Nairobi to the very small informal settlements on Mwanza, to these settlements that are being eaten away by sea level rises in Accra and Freetown, slum dweller communities are right now embarking on probably the largest and the most systematic and systemic mapping of informal settlements, together with partners bringing high-tech and low-cost solutions. So not only are they mapping their settlements with drone technology, with our partners at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, but they're also mapping and documenting every single layer of life in slums. So from the infrastructure, from what building materials are being, what slums are being built of, also to the last mile infrastructure that communities are already building every single day. Because slum dwellers know it's not just their lives, but their livelihoods that are at stake with climate change and all the other things that are coming with it. So really, when we look at how slum communities are working together with city governments to generate the data for planning, for investment, this is what communities are doing. in the most recent months, together with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team in Freetown, the communities together with, and in collaboration with the city and the Ministry of Lands, drone mapped at 5 centimeter precision, 75 square kilometers of the city of Freetown. This data will directly contribute to the property management system of the city. So this is what communities are doing. We have mapped in Accra and in Freetown. We are mapping the building infrastructure. We are mapping not only the infrastructure, but also the lives and the livelihoods of people. We are not mapping unemployment. We are mapping self-employment. We are mapping the infrastructure, the data infrastructure, to be leveraged by our partners, by those who are coming to work with communities and their cities. We are mapping this data infrastructure and creating the social capital and political capital that slum dwellers need and have been utilizing for more than 30 years in their organized communities to negotiate with their local governments, but also at the global level with our partners at UN Habitat. So that's
Thank you, Annie. Today's message is clear. We're bridging the gap between innovation and capital is possible, but we only need to align systems, empowering cities and value resilience, which is already there. And we are coming to a close, you know, time is running, and I want to honor everyone's time, so perhaps one last sentence from each of you. Fast forward 3 years, this room, same stage. Which improvement would you like to report which helped to unlock capital and resilience in African cities? We start with the woman, Annie.
Tough question. In 3 years' time, we would have created the data systems and the infrastructure, not just human, but also infrastructural for people to flourish in every single city in Africa. We have more than half of residents in cities live in informal infrastructure, but these cities are being built and can be better planned every single day. So they are ready. The question is everyone else?
Anacláudia.
For me, in the next 3 years, in all countries in Africa, urban housing policies are the center of the political stage.
Strong. Martijn.
3 years back and then a different microphone. So what I would like to see is more programs and projects that I just announced coming to market, being implemented. That means it's more upstream support, creating programs that are replicable, public, private, proper risk allocation. More of those programs being launched, then I would be very happy.
Thank you.
For me, it's very clear, and success will look like in, let's say, 5 years, most of our big cities in Africa will be able to borrow from the local market on the basis of their balance sheet, either borrowing on debt or emit obligations to be able to raise local currency finance for their project needs. That, to me, would be a fantastic success.
Thank you. And last, Ms. Ambassador.
Mine would be to re-engineer or send our engineers to start thinking resilience. They have been taught to design projects which are not resilient. And now is the time to start thinking about infrastructure that can last for 50 years and more, so that the cities cannot be suffocated to the same challenges that they are facing today, where some buildings, some infrastructures would just be there for 10 years, but they need to go back to school. Thank you.
Thank you. We have many enablers here at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference, so let's continue this dialogue beyond this room into partnerships, expert coalitions, and towards the G20 advocacy. So I really thank you, Mr. Moses Vilakati, Ambassador, Anacláudia Rossbach, Gabriela Hoven, Martijn Proos, Stefan Atchia, and Annie Boykes for being part of the session and enjoy the conference. And I would like to ask all the panelists and as well Gabriela Hoven for one last picture together. Thank you.